Hello, beautiful people. Carnivore Coach Peter here, and I have a special guest, Coach Stephen Thomas. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, Coach Peter, and it's such an honour to speak to you again, and I'm so pleased that you asked me to be part of what's going on in your world, because I think you're doing a brilliant job, a really brilliant job.
Thank you. You know, when Eddie introduced me to you, I took a look at some of your content, and I really like what you did. And for those of you who know, we have a carnivore certification program. It's an internationally recognized program, and I really liked your work on and your instruction on blood work and blood panels. And I reached out to you. For those who don't know, I reached out to Coach Stephen Thomas. I said, hey, could you put a little module together for our coaches to help understand blood work? Because it's very common that coaches will have clients that come to them and they'll be freaking out about certain numbers, even though they feel great. And we were talking before, they could actually feel good and have different blood markers, and their blood markers could actually look bad or good, and they can actually feel bad. So it's good to understand the whole concept behind blood work. And you put together a brilliant, like it's almost its own course of blood work going into each panel, the liver panel, thyroid, cholesterol, all those things. So thank you for doing that.
Well, it's my pleasure. I mean, I can remember when I started my journey, and there was nothing like that out there, and there isn't anything out there in phlebotomy or any really sort of blood-related work, so hematology, which relates to this way of eating. None at all. And I mean, I still do continual professional development, so I know what's out there and fresh, and people still aren't really talking about the A1C and the red blood cell life, even though when I trained, and we're talking a long, long time ago, I mean, I've been doing this for 16 years, of which 11 has been low carb, keto or carnivore. The A1C was always looked as unreliable, but in the light of someone that's got hemolytic anemia or any disease where the red blood cells don't last as long. So it's not something that we don't know about, but I think this is the idea of the course. I mean, I think it's an excellent course. Without my bit in it, you know, I went through the course. You very kindly let me have a look, and like the work from Eddie is always superb. I mean, Eddie Goki is superb. Obviously, Dr. Abs is on there as well, and yourself, of course. I can remember, you know, I'm pretty well qualified. I'm a specialist practitioner in obesity and diabetes. I have an honours degree in physiology and health science. But when I joined MeetRx 6 years ago and got my carnivore coaching certificate and my fasting certificate, it really wasn't as structured as this course that you put together, which is fabulous. And it also wasn't sort of internationally accredited. And that's one of two big things about it. The first one is the educational side of it. So if you really want to know your stuff, I think it's a great resource, and you get the self-testing, and it's Peter, the work you have done is amazing. It really is amazing. As someone who's put small courses together, you know, for my school community, I know how much work goes into it to get it right. I know that. And I think the second thing is, so you get the education, but you also then get the accreditation to give you the credibility, which is, you know, they're both the same root word, really. So that is going to keep you in good standing if you are looking to coach people. But I really think the educational part is stunning. And I did a course based on what would I have liked to have seen 10 years ago, because I answered questions that I was asking in the lab. I mean, I did 10 years of, you know, offering private blood testing and working with biomedical researchers and actually going to labs and stuff like that. And I always had questions because there's so many assumptions, so much, to be honest, laziness, because these normative ranges that everyone freaks out about and wants to be in, they don't relate to this way of eating in many, many cases. And when someone says, oh, that's high, I mean, Bart Kay is famous, and Eddie says it as well, you know, according to who, on the basis of what? And you know, that's really true, because if you've got the wrong premise to start with, and high is bad, when actually it's misunderstood. I mean, cortisol would be a great example. Cortisol isn't a stress hormone. Everyone calls it a stress hormone. It's a homeostatic hormone, which not only regulates blood pressure going up, but regulates blood pressure coming down, and blood glucose going up and coming down. And more often than not, it's even cortisol. It's not even cortisol doing that. It's more adrenaline and glucagon. But anyway, I've gone off the subject, which is why I asked you to host it. So I decided to basically say, let's go back to basics. Let's talk about how you actually test the blood. What happens in the lab, and what do these terms mean? What is glycation? It's all well and good saying, oh, my average glycation is this. If you don't really know how that number is arrived at and the limitations of the testing, which is huge, I mean, even, looking, this is part of the course, by the way, but I'm now repeating, but it's called a complete blood count because people used to count. I mean, they used to count them, looking at them. And this is now not happening, obviously, because the volume and the amount of blood testing that goes on. And a red blood cell that's a little bit small won't be counted as a red blood cell, it'll be counted as a platelet. And a platelet that's a little bit too big will be counted as a red blood cell. So when we get our complete blood count and our sort of analysis, we've got these immediate limitations straight away. Ferritin is another one, which has got a huge coefficient of, or a margin of error. I don't want to get too technical, where, if the reading is X, it could also be plus 15% or minus 15%. And because you've got this error of 30%, that could take someone that's allegedly high into optimal, so there is limitations. And that's why I tried to get across is firstly, well, what actually does happen in the lab? What does actually happen to the blood? How do they come up with these numbers? Yeah. And those numbers are based on, the analogy I'll use here is, it is the perfect numbers for someone that's eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates, who is really fit. That's what you would think they were, but actually it's somebody that's eating 45 to 65% carbohydrates who's given blood. So we would say probably, if you're looking at the general population, maybe 10%, 12% of those people are actually healthy and the rest are not. So it's weighted, isn't it? It's weighted in the sick, diseased atmosphere of maybe 80% of those numbers are taken from people that aren't very well, not optimal. So we've got to look at making the numbers relative, the range is understandable, and how we test the bloods. So if I sprint at the gym, all right, they've got a running track, and I'll go and time myself doing 100 meters. Now, I'll come off the track and I think, well, that's not bad. I'm 61, I've run it in 16 seconds, and I'd come off of that feeling really great. Oh, that's not a bad run, or I'd run it in faster than that, let's say. If I then went in and looked on the board at the top 10 runners in the club, wow. Oh, I'm really bad. Oh, wow. They've run it in 11 seconds. Oh, wow. And then if I spoke to the manager and he said, oh, ignore that. That's the best 10 in the county. I'm looking at the wrong numbers and being absolutely mortified. Then if I said, well, have you got an old farts, plus 60s, what their numbers are? Oh, yeah, it's over there. And you see that the average is 20 seconds. I'm golden in the same room, in the same space, because I've looked at the wrong numbers and the ones that are relevant to me. And I've gone from, wow, I'm really sick to, wow, I am super, super fit. So that's the analogy I would like to use, that people will get the numbers more realistic in their mind and more tangible, and understand that this way of eating makes you a different cohort.
Exactly. When I've been coaching for a long time as well, about 20 years now, not carnivore, you've been coaching people on carnivore much longer. And when I transitioned my practice from coaching people, and we were taught the standard American diet, and you couldn't go wrong as long as you got your clients eating more vegetables. That's your goal. Just get your clients more fiber, get those green smoothies in. For the advanced clients, get them juicing, which is interesting. Wow. Yeah, which is interesting because you're eliminating the fiber. So that was actually a little seed that was planted in my ear. And when I started coaching people on carnivore a few years ago, I was just repeating what a lot of these mainstream people were saying, like people like Sean Baker, like Anthony Chafee, like all the big names, Ken Berry. But there wasn't, although they're very educated, there wasn't enough specific things for me to be a good coach. And I realized I still had a lot to learn, because when I started coaching people, my clients were coming to me with these blood markers. They were asking me hard questions about fiber, about cholesterol, about my stress hormone is high, about how my stress, all these different things. I have pre-diabetes, which you go in incredible detail in our program with all these things. And my clients come to me, and I was not prepared, Coach Stephen. I was like, okay, I have more to learn. So I binge watched Bart's channel. And then eventually I came across Eddie, and Eddie is a brilliant mind who was actually another one of our main instructors. And having that base understanding, that foundation to know what you're talking about is so important as a coach. And so I really appreciated when I came to you, I said, what things do you wish you had known when you started coaching people? I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, like I say, Eddie is excellent because his depth of knowledge is fantastic, and he's got quite a nice. I think now his videos that they have for him, there is a bit more humour there and a bit more
Yeah.
warmth, whereas before it was very, very bluntly and starkly educational. I think it's, entertaining as well, and I think that helps to make it a little bit educational. I mean, you hit on one thing which you did with a smile there about your stress hormone. That is everywhere. That is absolutely everywhere. And it's not. It's a homeostatic hormone. It's a circadian rhythm driver. So if you did something to deliberately blunt your cortisol in the morning, you are ruining your circadian rhythm. I mean, that's a fact. The slope in the morning is meant to be there, and the diurnal sort of fluctuation of cortisol, it's pulsatile, it comes out, it's there all the time. It's always badly explained. It absolutely always is. It's not even the main primary driver of raising blood glucose. Glucagon is.
I love that. Something that was trending, and it bothers me now with these fitness experts. They pretend to be these hormone masters. They're like, let's master your thyroid. Let's master. Oh, you have cortisol in the morning? A little bit of glucose will bring that cortisol down because we don't want that stress hormone coming up. And all these things. And I was like, do these people even know how many hormones are in the body? And I remember asking, I was like, how many hormones are in the body? They're like, well, at least a dozen, they say. Like, okay. It's these fitness and these health experts that just take bits of information. And that's why in our program, I wanted it to be well-rounded, and you do a great job talking about cholesterol as well. And I think you're going to be doing another one on some myths and separating facts from fiction. But could you go into not into too much detail because I don't want to spend too much time, but could you just talk about briefly what is a common myth about cholesterol and what is the misunderstanding between the bad and good cholesterol that people tend to have?
Well, the myth around cholesterol started in 1913 when they fed a rabbit cholesterol dissolved in seed oil and were surprised to see that there was an atherosclerotic plaque and the rabbit didn't do very well. These rabbits that are famous for eating steaks. Yes. The reason I start with that was quite interesting because it's come full circle where they've gone back to the rabbits and they've actually done the experiment again with cholesterol dissolved in seed oil, cholesterol without seed oil, and also injecting LDL, which isn't even cholesterol, it's a low density lipoprotein, into the rabbit. And the rabbit that suffered, or the rabbits that suffered, were only the ones with the seed oils, which I think is very interesting. But if we start with this really bad premise, and I think this is analogous to what I said about thinking that the numbers are the things to look at when they don't really relate to us. If you start with the false premise that, cholesterol, LDL is causing the problem in the rabbit, then everything after that, if you haven't got your eyes open to 1950s where there was fraud involved, absolutely public documents saying that the Sugar Research Foundation paid off two researchers, $50,000 each in today's money to falsify data to implicate fat rather than sugar in the atherosclerotic plaque development. It's basically money driven. Low density lipoproteins are not even cholesterol. It's the container which has cholesterol in. It also has triglycerides in and fat soluble vitamins, which you need when they're transported around the body. When you even scratch the surface, the British Medical Journal in 2016 took 19 different studies and looked at what are the outcomes, the hard health outcomes, not things that they can fudge. People dying, which you can't mess up. That's what happened. And when you looked at the LDL cholesterol levels, which isn't cholesterol, by the way, but I'm using the parlance that everyone does, those with the highest cholesterol lived the longest. That's a fact out of 16 out of 19 studies. And that is repeatable. And we've had the Interheart study where they've looked at, I think it's over 52 different countries, where they've looked at people admitted to hospital with heart attacks. 72%, I think it was, off the top of my head, 72% of those people that were admitted had normal or low cholesterol. So that's 3/4 of the people there had normal or low cholesterol, less than 130 milligrams per deciliter. And I could give you countless other studies. I'm not going to do it like you said. Let's try and make it as brief as possible. So if you want lots of supporting data, there is lots of supporting data out there. It's all publicly available. But of course, the most profitable drug in the world is statin, which is a medication that lowers your LDL cholesterol. And to what end? So when you look at medications, you can look up what's called the number needed to treat. So if people think that doctor's done that for me for my situation. You need to look at anything you're given and look it up online and look at the number needed to treat. And just to make it easy, and I'm going to be very optimistic because some of the numbers are actually bigger, but one statin off the top of my head, you need to treat 80 people for one person to get a benefit, which means 79 people get that and they get no benefit. And that's in the literature. So you can look up the number needed to treat. You can also look up the number needed to harm, which is how many people would be given this drug and have side effects. And in that particular case I'm thinking of, it's about 25 people. So you're 4 times nearly, let's say 3, let's be generous, you're 3 times more likely to have a side effect than have a benefit.
Wow.
So it's money driven, but like in the course, I go through what you can look at, and then they hang on to this dogma, it's still a theory. 110 years later, it's still a theory. It's not proven. So ApoB is now the thing. Well, that's a protein that surrounds low-density lipoproteins, and they still correlate, well, if that's high. So this is where they're using a proxy marker. So if you believe that LDL being high causes a problem, then the next time you do a study, you've got to prove that ApoB, which is attached to LDL, if that's high, therefore that's a problem, because you've got the false premise built on another false premise. Your ApoB is really high. Well, that's a risk to your heart. Well, no, because you're doing this joined up thinking. ApoB is attached to LDL, so that must be high, therefore you must be having a problem. It's not cholesterol, that's a protein, a signaling protein around the outside, and the issue there isn't even to do with cholesterol, that's to do with glycation, because the protein becomes glycated and damaged. Anyway, I don't know how much detail you wanted, but that's how deep we go in the course. I mean, I'll talk about this a bit longer with more background and more studies that you can look at, things that you can click on.
Love that. And to be honest, I study this for a living as well. I do this full time. Your module, and then that partnered with Dr. Ab's module. And then we also have Eddie's. It just helps you understand, like, it's almost like stepping out of the matrix. It's like saying, oh, I see, I see the picture. And then you follow the money trail. But that can, when you just come across as a coach and be like, oh, it's just money, but to actually have the scientific understanding about knowing these studies that go against of what we're taught, I think that's so important. Was there anything outside of your module that kind of stuck out from our course that you thought was really necessary as a coach?
Well, I just think the way you touched on everything, electrolytes, I mean, talk about lipids, talk about the biochemistry. I just think it's amino acids. It's very good. It's pretty broad, I think. And the only reason that I was really drawn to it was because I felt the whole was, well, there's nothing about bloods here. 70% of medical decisions are taken based on blood panels. 70%.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So you need to have that in your armory.
It'd be safe to say, because you talked about at the beginning, I like what you said, in the armory, in the tool belt, that's good to have. When you talk about the general population that are getting blood work, we have to keep in mind that these people are not necessarily usually healthy either. Would that be safe to say as well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because they're getting blood work for a purpose, really.
Yeah. And all these averages are drawn from people that it's unlikely they are optimal, or at least relatable to you, because we're also so very different. You do need big numbers, but we need big numbers of people eating low carb. Well, that's not happening. Nobody's being contacted. Oh, we want to do the normative ranges for people eating this way. So can you come and join this study to give bloods and tell us whether you're optimal or not? It's just too expensive, and it's a minefield. So the thing is to take your existing knowledge and apply it. So I've been able to do that with thyroid panels and blood panels for glucose management and insulin, because we have the details there, liver and kidney. The thyroid is the biggest one. And going back to sort of people you respect, there are people that I respect a lot out there, and I like their content very much. And I think most of it is absolutely top notch. But I can give you an example of how even people in the mainstream who you really respect miss stuff. So I don't mind name dropping because I'm not saying anything particularly bad. There's a guy called Ninja Nerd who is fantastic. I mean, really fantastic, and goes into the biochemistry and really knows his stuff. But when they talk about T3 entering the cell, they don't mention the monocarboxylar transporter. They just say it diffuses, because that's the mainstream way of looking at it. But it doesn't. And that's one of the things that happens when we have more ketones. We upregulate the MCTs, not the medium chain triglyceride, the monocarboxylate transporter. And I think it's 10 off the top of my head. But anyway, you could look up monocarboxylate transporters and ketones upregulate it. So the T3 is getting into the cell at a better rate. It's upregulated. So you're going to get more bang for your buck from your T. So I think it's also Dr. Mike, who's down in Australia or something like that. Again, great stuff. Really, really good. Same thing. But so the mainstream has this constant thing where they treat T3 as if it's a steroid hormone, which it isn't. It's definitely amino acid base, a thyroglobulin, TPO, tyrosine, iodine. None of that is fat. Iodine, actually, T3 is out on its own. Actually, all the thyroid hormone is out on its own. It's the only hormone in the body which has a trace element from the Earth's crust, essential for its construction, in its construction. Wow. So when we talk about hormones, we need to understand that hormones aren't just hormones. They go into sectors. So you've got like peptide hormones. And once you understand that, which from its name, you can imply it's made out of amino acids, that can't get into the cell. So it has to have a transporter. Then you've got steroid hormones because it's fat loving, lipophilic, if you want the posh word. That can go straight into the cell. And then you've got thyroid hormone. And this is where the nuance is really important, because we can't treat thyroid hormone as a steroid hormone because it isn't. It does do some things that steroid hormones can do. It can actually definitely get into the nucleus and interact with a transcription factor and start producing proteins, which is exactly what it does. It, at its most basic, basically makes sodium potassium pumps. And that's how it works. Your metabolic rate. That's how it improves it and revs it up. So we need to understand these basics to be able to go, right, okay, now we understand that there's 3 types of hormone. Once you understand that, you can sort of reverse engineer where they come from. So look at renin, right? Well, how do you remember what renin is? Well, most things that end in are peptide hormones because they're from proteins, so insulin. And the renal position, the kidneys, makes renin. So all of these, and that's what I try to do. So people can, if they're with a client, they've told me this word, I don't really understand it. Well, you can reverse engineer and say, well, what does the word mean? So, so anything that's got emia on the end, that's in the blood. So if you've got hyperglycemia, well, it's elevated glucose in the blood, so that's the thing I want to get people to really, really get to the nuggets of how the words are put together. So it's easy to understand, and, you can apply it to people that you're coaching on the fly, so to speak. Even if they say something and you're not 100% certain, you can think, okay, I need to understand that. And you can do that on just off the top of your head.
That. And, we have our program. You can even access it on the app. You can just, what did Coach Steven say about this? And just pop it up and say, there's the reference there. And then even if they're at the doctor's office, they can say, what did he say about that? So that's good. So the coaches are very excited that they're much more prepared, because I do agree with you. I think that was a missing link. And another part that I really like is the community that we all come together. We have the Facebook group. People can talk to each other. And we have some of the other instructors in our Facebook group where we can share questions, share ideas. And just recently, we shared a post. I let the coaches know that we were going to do a meeting with you. And there were some questions that popped up. Do you mind addressing some of those questions from the coaches?
That's fine.
That'd be great. Okay, I'll let you have it in front of you. So I'll let you or you did.
Right. I'll have to call that up. I thought you'd have it. Right. You want me to read the question as well?
Yeah, I'm making it work hard today.
You are, aren't you? Yes, that's okay. I do appreciate it. Right. When I said you're brilliant, I'll take that back now. Right. No, not really. Right. Here we go.
Bloody brilliant.
See you up, I think that is. How can we know someone needs to take supplements despite blood work shows in-range results? So actually, this is perfect, isn't it? Let me move it over there so I'm not looking in profile. So how can we know someone needs to take supplements despite blood work shows in-range results? It seems the body tries to always keep homeostasis. You've hit the nub of everything that I talk about. The body knows best. It does want to get you into a level where it's happy, homeostatic level. Now, then people get symptoms. Now, why is that happening? Because we're idiots as humans. We do all the wrong things. Look at Peter and I. Look, we should be out there We should be outside doing stuff, but no, we're looking at screens. Some people have coffee. I don't actually have a coffee. That's a fatty latte. But, we drink coffee. We go on our apps way too much. And we do these things that dysregulate us, and we don't drink the right water or the right amount of water, or we avoid salt or whatever. So we do all these stupid things and we get some symptoms. So supplements are exactly what the word implies. You're supplementing your nutrition because there's something in your nutrition or in your lifestyle that isn't quite right. So you might be getting cramps. Use that as an example. Now, when you get your biochemistry in your bloods, it might not show that you've got a magnesium deficiency, but your body is saying, I've got a magnesium deficiency, or I've got a hydration problem, fluid balance, osmolarity problem, all things that we do talk about in the course. So we supplement and we do the things that work for people in the main. So it's a bit of trial and error. And you'll say, right, okay, well, maybe in this situation, you may need some magnesium glycinate, because that is known to help with muscle relaxation, and that possibly could resolve your cramps. So there's no one size fits all. I'm really not a fan of people saying, do this dose. And I'll explain why, because it's all about concentration and ratios. I've got 5 litres of blood in my body. All right. I'm 5'10". Someone 6'4" might have 6 litres of blood, and a little child might have 3 litres of blood. But if I give you a can of Coke, that's got 9 teaspoons of sugar in. So I drink that, and the concentration of the sugar in 5 litres of blood, not too bad, it's not great, obviously. Someone who's 6'4" with more blood, that's less sugary concentration. And the child, wow, that's way too much sugar. I mean, it's bad for me, but for the child. And we wonder why children are hyperactive, because you're giving them this huge concentration of something that adults struggle with, and you're making it even worse for them. So the reason I use that story is to get it into your head that there's no perfect dose. There's no, take 10 milligrams, that's going to be perfect, or whatever, 3 times a day, whenever. So I always say, if you're going to try the magnesium glycinate, maybe follow the instructions on the bottle and see what happens, then report back after a week. If the magnesium glycinate in this example of cramp doesn't work, it could be something else. It could be just simple hydration, just not enough water. But that doesn't mean drinking so much water that your urine is clear. It needs to be straw coloured. Water is still waste, so it needs to have parts per million in it. It needs to have waste. It needs to have a specific gravity, which you can test as well. But it gets ever so much into the weeds when you start looking at this. So you need to keep things really simple and be led by not just the blood work, but also the symptoms. Because like we said at the beginning, yes, you can have perfect blood. And biochemistry in the main, the body is so good at regulating it, it won't really show up.
I use that same, exactly. Well, especially with water soluble vitamins, like the blood work probably won't pick up on that, right?
Yeah.
But I use that same approach with my clients, like start with like the recommended dose. Like you mentioned magnesium. People say, well, how much, if they're having stool issues, they say, how much magnesium citrate should I have? And I say, start with the dose. If it was me, I would increase the dose every day until I have some relief. But again, it's like, why are they having that issue? So you have to, as a coach, you need to look. Yeah, you need to, supplements are just to supplement, like you said.
Yeah.
And the more, and I say this to the clients too, the more unnatural your environment, the more unnatural and the more tweaks you'll have to do in your everyday life, because of our water is so purified. We're not drinking the blood of the animal, or water so sterile and clean. We need electrolytes, some of us, depending on where we are.
Yeah. I mean, you hit on one of my favorite things to say, actually. It's a little bit of a joke, but you need to think of ways to make your coaching life easier by having a little bit of humor or something that helps you remember. So I always call magnesium citrate magnesium shit rate, because it improves your production. So I think if you can make things really easy in your mind to get to what works all the time, if you can think of little funny things as well, or something to say to your client that might break the ice a little bit. I mean, obviously, if they don't like you swearing, don't use that. But I think the root cause thing is absolutely the best approach.
Yes.
But it's sometimes difficult to get the client to do that, because I can't, I want a good night's sleep, my cramp. I'll get into that, but can we just do a bridge to get me a good couple of nights sleep? So that's where the supplement comes in. I'm not anti-supplements, but
you've noticed in our program too, I kind of linked supplements and transitioning together, because that's usually when it's necessary,
Yeah.
And especially if they're having let's say if they're having still high sugar, like they can't break that sugar addiction, maybe a little bit of fruit, maybe a little bit of vitamin C, just to offset that sugar a little bit, can help them get through and eventually get off most of the supplements. And then if there's an issue that comes later on, you can take a look at that.
Yes. Should we do Paul's question next?
Yeah, Paul always has great questions.
Yeah. I would love to hear him, that's me, by the way, go more
not
into
me?
red blood
Okay.
Well, I think it's me. I would love to hear him go into red blood cells longer on carnivore, assuming there is more to go into. I believe he said in the course that it was actually observed that this happened to somebody, if I'm not mistaken. So I'd imagine there's a story there somewhere. Yeah, Paul. Well, I mean, that it isn't somebody. It's hundreds of thousands of people. So how it all started was when there wasn't many people eating carnivore or keto even, and even when the Atkins thing happened, it really didn't get picked up so well. But it was picked up when people had artificially low HbA1c, which didn't make any sense when you looked at their blood glucose, and certainly when you looked at their clinical presentation. And it was found that you couldn't say to someone you're not diabetic based on the A1C if they were hemolytic anemic, which is absolutely nailed on. You can absolutely test for that. And one of the tests is what's called the reticulocyte count, and that is the production of the red blood cells. So when they are dying sooner, and I will explain that process, because again, that's well known what is causing that to happen, your bone marrow will produce more red blood cells, and that's what a reticulocyte is. It's an immature red blood cell. That's simply what it is. So obviously, if you see production ramping up, the body isn't doing that just because it wants to. It's doing it because it realizes that there's a shortage of red blood cells. So a high reticulocyte count indicates that there is red blood cells dying off too soon. And that is going to give you, now I don't want to do what I did in the course because I've got props and stuff like that, but I can assure you, as you've got the course, you can look at it again. So we know that the hemolytic anemics, we know that's medical, that's absolutely nailed on. So about 6 years ago, when I started at MeatRx and doing their diabetes meeting, because so many people now have continual glucose monitors, I was getting this, I used to do a Thursday night meeting, and I was getting every single time, I don't understand, my A1C is going up. Why is it going up? Why is it going up? Because when I look at my actual average from my blood glucose, it isn't high. And I said, well, because it's an unreliable marker. So for those that really like maths, the problem with the HbA1c is they treat a variable number, which is the life of the red blood cell, as a constant. They just basically bang on a number and say, all red blood cells live this long. That is a fundamental flaw in the A1C. It's not been a problem before because it works for people that are eating carbohydrates between 45 to 65%. The average person on a huge number of people, millions and millions, it works. I've got a problem with the HbA1c if you are eating a lot of carb because it works. But the problem is, the red blood cells do not actually get wiped out by the spleen in this cytosolic space because they're glycated. They get destroyed and recycled because their membranes are not deformable. So red blood cells have to be deformable. This is not a pie in the sky. This is what happens. And it goes through this space, and it's a bit like a Disney ride. You can't be bigger than this to ride. So if that red blood cell can't deform and can't get through the spaces, it's recycled. So the membrane of the red blood cell, and this actually links in to atherosclerotic plaques and LDL, by the way. There's a thing called glycophorin A, which is a protein. So it's a protein that, let's get a red blood cell. Right, there's a red blood cell, and it has a protein that sticks out the top, okay? And that's glycophorin A. And on it is oxalic acid, which is like a sugar, and it's negatively charged. So if you then get another red blood cell coming along, and that's also got a protein sticking out, and that comes along, it won't attract each other because they've both got this negative charge sticking out. So that's actually how red blood cells don't stick together because of this glycoprotein A, which is only found in red blood cells. And it's also found in atherosclerotic plaques, which proves that red blood cells, clotting of red blood cells is actually part of the thrombotic process, which actually can end up with plaques. But anyway, that's for another day. Let's get back to answering the question. So what happens is the red blood cells in a carnivore don't get destroyed. They don't get glycated as much. Glycation is the permanent bonding of glucose, which is in a linear form, attaching to the protein, the amino acid, the nitrogen end of the hemoglobin, in this case, is what we're looking at. And once it's attached, it's a dysregulated protein, right? But that's not enough to stop it. It's only in the membrane that stops it being viable. So our red blood cells can live longer because we don't glycate the membrane as much. The A1C gives the impression that there's more glycation because it's a calculation. So you can do other tests. You can do the fructosamine test, which is not affected by red blood cell life. That gives you a 3-week average. So if you're new to carnivore and you've got the money to do a fructosamine test, get a good benchmark, and then 3 weeks later get another one, and you'll see that your glycation's gone down. You can also do a glycated albumin test. And I'm now getting into things that are 1,5-AG test, which is looking at glucose molecules that are dehydrated, which the body does. And these give you much better readings, much better readings for glycation. But the brilliant thing about talking about glycated albumin is the point that it isn't just hemoglobin that's glycated, it's every protein in your body. So if you start adding carbs because your A1C's gone up, you don't understand what's going on in your body, and you're actually increasing glycation of albumin, for instance, a transport protein, which is absolutely essential. Now, once it's glycated, so the same thing, linear form of glucose, the carbonyl end sticking to the nitrogen terminus of the protein in albumin. Once it's there, it's irreversible. So you've got a dysregulated protein, the transport protein, which is really important for moving things around your body. Your affinity for things to bind to it is reduced. So you're going to have a problem, absolutely, transporting around cortisol. Let's go to cortisol because everyone thinks that's a big problem. Yeah, the stress hormone. So glycation is actually going to make the transport of cortisol worse. And a lot of bloods, by the way, not measuring what's in the tissue, it's measuring what's in the blood, and it's not measuring what's effective, it's measuring what's in the blood. So once you start looking at these things, it gets to the point where it all makes sense, it all joins up. So this is why people with a CGM can see their average blood glucose go down, but their A1C go up, because the red blood cells are living longer in this way of eating because we're doing less damage to them. We're not glycating the membranes as much, where there's not as much oxidative stress. So the recycling of red blood cells is 5 million red blood cells recycled every second, and we also produce 2.5 million every second new ones. This is a huge thing that's going on in the body, huge. So we need to understand red blood cells at its most basic. I would say to anyone that wants to understand human physiology, go right back to basics. Learn what blood is, how it works. And, the fact that red blood cells don't have mitochondria, so they have their own way of generating energy, and it's just incredible. But anyway, that was a long answer to that question. Sorry.
Great answer. Some of your answer was in your module, and you go more in depth, but thank you so much for addressing that specific one. I think there's one more that's not really blood related.
Yeah. So, Carol, this is an interesting one because I am a product of someone who lost their appendix when I was 5 and had a very botched operation as I got to my 6th year, which plagues me now, but nothing to do with what you've got. Anyway, right. So, Carol says, 11 months into strict, never cheated OMAD, carnivore, 6 weeks ago underwent an emergency appendectomy due to acute appendicitis with ruptured appendix IV after surgery. I'm assuming that you rejected it, not that your body rejected it, but anyway, that's not really relevant to the answer, but just to clarify. Hospitalized for a week, dedicated to continue my carnivore lifestyle for the rest of my life, and what should I be cautious about without my appendix? Well, firstly, if you ever have your appendix taken out, the mainstream medical people will say, well, you don't need it. Well, the body is a vestigial organ, definitely, and probably you can do all right without it. But I would just say, once you've had the operation, there's a few things. So I just want to make sure I'm getting the question right for you. So, within the first 1 to 4 weeks out of hospital, avoid any sort of heavy lifting, straining, don't do high intensity exercise. Be careful of constipation. Now, this is where the OMAD is actually possibly going to be problematic, because don't forget your insides now are inflamed. So maybe go to 2-3 meals just temporarily, so there's less stress on your GI tract, because basically producing stool is going to put pressure on where the healing incision is, to be honest, which is one of the things I had a problem with, even at 6. Because also hydration is important. You've lost a lot of blood, so you've lost a lot of electrolytes, as Peter was alluding to, about us drinking blood as people years, hundreds of millions of years ago. So make sure your hydration is right. I would look at things like maybe adding a little bit of liver in if you're not eating liver, because I
Yeah,
think the nutrient density, for healing.
I was going to mention that. Yeah.
Avoid non-steroid anti-inflammatory drugs, because they thin your blood and they slow your wound healing. So if you can get away with that, that would be fine. You feel normal after 6 to 12 weeks, I think, but truly 3 to 6 months and you'll be back on your feet and you would have been totally recovered from it, I think. Did you want to add some answer to that then, Peter?
No, I'm smiling because I had those same responses, and you went more into detail of why, but yeah, very, very well responded. I would do smaller meals, ease the stress. And I would also focus on electrolytes because obviously a lot of blood and lots of rest. If she can get some grounding in just to relax. I know she's a very busy.
All right.
And so take a break. Okay. Maybe this is the universe saying to slow down a little bit. But yeah, great answers. Thank you so much. And this is one of the things that our coaches get, like, that community support. So when you are working with a client, and you're kind of stuck, because when I started coaching people, Coach Stephen, like I did feel quite alone out here, because it's not like I could just say, oh, just ask the doctor, because they're going to give a totally different answer. But you don't have to prescribe, you don't have to diagnose, but just to have a good understanding of what the readings say, what would be the best approach, what I would do in that situation, I think is so important. A couple things I want to ask you too is there one module that I think you're going to be adding soon, is maybe the fasting one as well? Do you think that's an important thing to learn as a coach?
Possibly when not to do it is more important to learn than why to do it, because I think most people actually are quite well versed in what the benefits are. But I think things like the migratory motor complex is really underestimated, which is the 4-hour not eating protein that gets in to clear up your GI tract and get rid of any sort of remaining food debris. I think that's not talked about enough. But yes, I mean, people fast for therapeutic reasons, for autophagy, for body composition. But obviously I have people wanting to fast who are very lean. So you have to look at that, and how to break the fast is also very important. So yeah, I will do a module on that.
Yeah, I think I consider fasting like a muscle, just like carnivore. You have to ease in, you have to ease out. You can't just do cold turkey, but we're looking forward to that module again. If anyone wants to connect, you could, maybe you'll put the website link in the description of the video, Coach Stephen?
Yeah, yes. So when you say the website link, my website or your website, what do you mean?
If you're interested in the course, you can go right to our website, and then you can book a call with me, or you could email Coach Stephen and ask more questions if you have. But yeah, any final thoughts there?
Well, again, I just want to thank you for doing a resource that I wish was around when I started, because it is very well explained and there's lots of supporting material, and it is nice to have those pop quizzes, which are just great because it's proper education. It's all well and good listening to a podcast and thinking that's great information, but many people do that, and then it's that they'll talk to me and say, oh, I saw this great one yesterday, we were at Westman. Then I say, well, what was it saying that was so good? And like, well, I can't really remember. It's sort of about this. And, so I think if you really want to know your stuff, and one of the big things about eating this way is people dismissing you as a bit weird, or they don't want to know. I think if you've got the knowledge, and I'm not saying, so my joke is, how do you know someone is a vegan when they're a vegan? They tell you, right? So you don't want to be that, all right? You want to be the person that everyone comes to you because they like how you look, or how your mood or whatever. And they ask you intelligent questions like, wow, Peter, I remember when you were a bit overweight or a bit anxious, and what are you doing? And then you can say, well, I'm doing carnivore, or I'm doing low carb, if you think carnivore might scare them off. If they start asking you questions, if you know your stuff, and as Einstein famously said, you don't know your stuff unless you can explain it to a 6-year-old. If you know your stuff, you can make it much more basic for people. Yes. And you can say, well, I've taken carbs out because it's going to control my blood glucose and make it more stable. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, if it's going up and down, that's bad for you. Yeah. Just make it very, very simple. Whereas I've got it nice and steady. Well, why is that? Why is that bad when it goes up? Well, and I like the thing about kids being hyperactive. Well, if you have a lot of sugar, how do you feel? How do you feel? And, well, I feel a bit buzzed. And do you get a sugar crash? Oh yeah, I'm always hungry by 11. So you get them to listen to your physiology by relating it to their actual life, but you know it, you know why that's happening and why people feel that way. That's the most powerful thing I say to people is if they'll say, well, isn't it boring? I say, well, what did you eat for breakfast? Well, I had toast and cereal. Well, what did you have yesterday? Well, I had cereal. What did you have the day before? Well, I had toast. Like, well, hang on a minute. You're not exactly Mr. Variety, are you?
Yeah.
So I think that's it. Just the more you know, the more relaxed you can be. And actually the less information you need to give out because you know what's relevant to say.
Yeah.
And if anyone then queries it and wants to dive down, you have the confidence to say, well, I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I know what, and you can say in more detail. And then if people, that's the other thing. If people are asking you questions, that's not them being negative. That's actually a sign of interest.
Yes.
So you can say, well, look, you seem really interested in it. I've got this study. You can have a look at this. This is, 62,000 people, and the ones that went on low carb reversed their type 2 diabetes. And it just gives you the power to be able to let people make their own minds up a bit more, and you don't sound like a fanatic. One of the things I find when you're watching anything on YouTube is people say a lot of stuff, but when you challenge, well, what actually do you mean by that? They don't know. Yeah. So this thing with Charlie Kirk recently, he's a racist. Oh, what did he actually say that was racist? Just give us one quote. They can't do it. Whether you like him or not, what I'm saying is there are people that have these opinions and they have nothing to back them up.
Because so-and-so said it.
Yeah.
And that's the purpose of the program. It's like whenever I'd say something to a client at the beginning, they said, well, why is that to me? And I'd be like, well, because Sean Baker said so. that even though it's not a good enough reason, but to have that backing has been a game changer for myself and the other coaches, and having your module in there. So if carnivore has changed your life and you want to help other people, this is a growing community. Just on Facebook alone, we have a carnivore beginners group. We have about 145,000 people in that one. We actually have the world's largest carnivore Facebook group. We have more than 500,000 people in there asking for help, wanting insight. So we need coaches out there spreading the word, teaching people how to do this properly. So thank you for being on our team, Coach Stephen.
That's okay. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Okay, we'll chat with you. We'll connect online on social media, and we'll chat with you soon.
Yeah.
Peace and me.